I'm Neil Davidson and I'm the founder of Raw Umber Studios. Welcome to our third portrait drawing session. This video will mimic the structure of a live drawing class. We'll show you 3 photographs on the screen, one for 10 minutes, one for 20 minutes and one for 30 minutes, and your job is to draw the picture that you see. Lisette Dingemans will be joining us and she'll be doing a demo in the bottom corner of the screen, and she'll also be talking about materials. You could draw by yourself or around the kitchen table with your family, or you can join a Skype call or Zoom or WhatsApp and talk to your friends and draw along with them. Don't forget to post your work to Instagram once you've finished and hashtag it with Raw Umber Live. Right, let's get started.
Hi everyone, this is Lisette Dingemans and welcome to another Raw Umber portrait video. Some people were asking about materials in the last video we did, so what I thought I could do is take the first 10 minutes of this video to explain a little bit about materials. We're also going to do a separate video on this and we'll link that video down below. As Neil probably already has mentioned, we're going to be doing 3 poses today. A 10-minute, a 20-minute and a 30-minute pose. The pictures will be up in the video and I will be drawing along. There's going to be a little bit of a change today, whereas the first 10 minutes I'm not going to draw along with the portrait. Instead, I'll be taking that time to explain a little bit about materials for the beginners. If you already are familiar and comfortable with your own materials, please feel free to mute me for the first 10 minutes and then you can just draw along for the 20 and the 30-minute pose. Just a little side note as well, I won't be chatting throughout the whole video, so don't worry, the sound has not gone. I just don't always have something to say. Alright, so let's get to the materials. As everybody is at home, I wanted to go for some materials that are easy to get. Most people will already have at home, and if they are not already at your home, they're nice and cheap. With these videos, we're going to put an emphasis on practice and repetition, as that's the way you learn to draw. So we're not going to delve too deep into different materials or get too fancy. We're just going to start with the humble pencil. When learning to draw, it actually doesn't really matter what material you're using. As you probably saw last video, I actually used charcoal, which is my preferred choice. But I thought we could start with the pencil, as everyone probably has one in their home. Before we start delving into the pencil, we first have to get our paper up. So I'm going to be using just printer paper today, and I'm actually taping it to a rigid surface with painter's tape. This is also really cheap, shouldn't be more than 2-3 quid, and it's designed to stick but also be taken off easily, so it doesn't rip the paper when you take your drawing off. Next, what I'll be using is, as I said already, the pencil. Now there's a few different grades in pencil. There is HB, HB, there's all these different sorts of pencils, and what do they mean? Well, an H is actually, I always remember H for hard. So the more hard a pencil is, the higher the number. So an H will be, a 2H will be harder than a normal H, a 3H will be harder than a 2H, and so forth. The B's are the opposite. Unfortunately, it's not B for boffed. I don't quite know what the B stands for, but B is just softer. So when you see me drawing, you can see that the H doesn't actually put that much pencil down on the paper, whereas the B puts down quite a bit of the same amount of pressure. Now you also just saw me draw 2 lines, one with quite a grip and the other one with the pencil held at an angle. And you can see straight away that the one at the grip leads to a much stronger line. So as you can see, I'm just writing my name and you can see how I hold my pencil there. That's how we're used to holding our pencil. It's really good for strong, precise movements, like for instance if you're writing, but actually not as good for drawing. with drawing, what you want is to be able to put down light lines with a lot of flexibility and a bigger range of movement. So what I usually do is I hold my pencil at the end. So instead of gripping it all the way in the front and holding it quite tightly, I try and hold it quite loosely and at the very end. And when I do that, the pencil doesn't lay down quite as strongly, which makes for a more easy to erase line. When I hold my pencil like that, I also can use my pinky to stabilize myself on the side of the paper. As you can see, the lines that I made with holding the pen on the pencil on the end were a lot lighter. Now, when you have a pencil that isn't been sharpened properly, it can happen that it doesn't lay down any graphite when you hold it at an angle like that, and that's why I sharpen my pencil like this. Now you can't get this with a normal sharpener, so what I usually do is I use a knife and a bit of sandpaper. We'll delve deeper into this in the actual materials video, as I've only got a few minutes on this one before we start for the actual portrait drawing. If you don't have a knife and a bit of sandpaper, you can also use a click pencil. They're usually £1 for 5 at Sainsbury's, and they also do the same thing. So just to recap the things I said about the pencil, just use an HB pencil. That's fine for most of the drawing. If you can't sharpen your HB pencil with a knife, try using a click pencil. You can buy those at the supermarket. Now about rubbers. I first want to show you the rubber that everybody knows, the white rubber. It's a hard rubber. It sometimes is on the end of your pencil, sometimes you can buy a big one. They start off white and they get dirty really, really quickly. When you erase with them, they can be a bit hard to control, but they're very, very strong. They get rid of the lines that I put down very strongly, quite easily. The only problem is with them, they leave a lot of dust behind it you then have to wipe off. What I like to do to make them a little bit more precise is go in with my knife and just cut a little wedge off. That way I can use the sharp end of the wedge for precise lines and the side of the big wedge, the big side of the wedge, for removing big areas of pencil or charcoal. The second type of rubber, and my favorite type of rubber, is the putty rubber. You may not have this at home, so don't worry if you don't, but it's nice to be able to get if you do have it. The nice thing about the putty rubber is that it's very flexible, so you can mold it to whatever size you need it to be, so you can be a lot more precise than you can with the hard rubber. Also, because it's so flexible, it doesn't always put a lot of pressure down, which is a good thing if you want to erase only a little bit, but not good if you want to try and erase these hard marks that we made earlier. It doesn't really cut into it like the hard rubber that did. Okay, so now you know the basics of how to hold a pencil. I want to show you a little bit about shading. When you shade, try and always use even pressure, drawing from the shoulder. So that's another thing that's really important. When you are holding your pencil, lots of people like to draw from the wrist, so still this has to do with writing, but actually it's better to hold the wrist completely steady and to just draw from your shoulder, so try and make the movements from your shoulder. The last thing that you saw me use in the last video was a brush. Now this is a very personal thing. I like using the brush to sort of blend it a little bit. It saves me a bit of time, but not everybody likes it, so it's completely optional. I like sort of going over the tone I've already put down and then sort of smudging it. You can also use a stump for this, or in a pinch you can also use your sleeve or a bit of tissue paper. It all does the same thing. So just to recap, you can use the stump to flatten things out. You can use the brush, or you can even use your sleeve or a piece of tissue. But this is optional, you don't need to smudge anything, it's just a personal preference. And you can always cut back into it with the rubber. Okay, so it looks like we're almost at the end of the first 10-minute pose. If I can give you one piece of homework, it would be try and hold your pencil at the end and not at the start of the pencil. Try and hold at the end, use your pinky to balance yourself, and try just covering a piece of paper of all kinds of lines. Try and go for long straight lines, diagonal lines, horizontal lines. Also try and draw some circles and just try and not scar the paper. Use thin lines and very short, not hairy lines. And I'll see you all in 10 seconds for the next portrait. Okay, so let's get started on the 20-minute pose. I'll be using pencil, but you can use, of course, whatever you prefer. We're going to start it the same way that we did last time with the big box of the head. So I started with drawing the top, bottom and the sides, and of course also the midpoint. Now in this pose the midpoint is exactly where the top of his nose is, so I use that as a nice midpoint, and that straight away is the middle of his face, so the center line. Okay, so he's a little bit angled, that's why I drew the box also at a little bit of an angle. You can use your pencil to check the angle and then put it in. Now the next thing that's really important is the diamond shape of the face. On him, the widest point of the face is where his that midpoint of the head is. So that's where I've drawn the widest point. You can check the angles of the front plane of his face by going from the widest point to his chin and the widest point to the front of his forehead. Then after that, what you can do is just start figuring out the general outline of the box. Now, like last time, we're going to start putting some of the features in, and like last time we're going to use the rule of thirds. So what that means is usually the brow line, the nose and the chin are all on 1/3, so that's where I've put them, and that's also true for our model today. For his eye socket, what you can look at is the box of his eye socket, so you can see how far it is from the midpoint and how much lower it is from the midpoint of his face, which is the nose, which is the first thing we drew. Once we've got the box for the eye sockets in, I'm going to start shading everything fairly quickly. It's just something I prefer myself, just to sort of get as much information in as quickly as possible, just like we did last week. As I explained in the material tutorial, it's better to just put some pencil down and then be able to cut in with the rubber than be scared to put anything down whatsoever. So just feel free to shade all over and then cut back in with the rubber. If you're holding your pencil in the way I taught you, it shouldn't make any marks that can't be erased. Note I'm holding my pencil at the end and not pressing at all. And now I'm going in with my putty rubber and just cutting out all the shapes of light. So for the mouth, you can have a look where the top lip is situated, if it's halfway from the bottom of the nose to the chin, or in his case, about 1/3 down. The ears are always located just below the nose and around the top of the brow. For this shorter pose, don't worry about making it look like him. Just try and just make it look like a person first, and then we can always put his defining characteristics on top. When you're figuring out how wide the nose is or how wide the lips are, always take vertical lines following the center line down and see, for instance, do the corners of the mouth line up with the eye corners, the inner corners, or do they line up with the middle of the eye? And that gives you a useful indication of where these things are located. Now I haven't put any of his hair in yet, so I'm just gonna quickly sketch that out. Just a quick indication of how big his hair is and where it sort of stops. When you're drawing, always just try and think about shapes. Just look at squares, triangles, that sort of shapes. Don't worry about him as a face or as a person. Just think, is this a square shape or a triangle shape? And that way the face will start appearing almost magically. Okay, so I like going in with the brush like I discussed in the material tutorial. I just like going in with it because it gives me a little bit of a sort of flatness to my shadows, but this is completely optional and it's very stylistic, so just do whatever you feel comfortable with. Now we've got all our big shapes in. I'm just trying to start breaking down all those shapes into smaller shapes. So like I just said, don't worry about what an eye is. Just look at, is that a triangle shape? Is that a square shape? And just make all those shapes a little bit smaller. And that's how you break down complicated shapes into smaller shapes. Don't worry if I'm a little bit ahead of you. You can always rewatch this video. If you think stuff is going a little bit too quick, just have a look at how I do it and then draw afterwards. Or just draw along in your own time and see how far you get. It's all about practice, it's all about repetition, and you'll see you'll get quicker the more you do this. As you can see, I'm holding the pencil at an angle if I want a darker, more sharp line, and more flat if I want a big shadow. This is something we also spoke about in the tutorial. And again, not to worry if I don't speak for a little bit. I'm just trying to let you get on with the drawing a little bit. And there's nothing really I've got to say right now. It's just breaking down the shapes a little bit more. And that just takes a little bit of time. Note that up till now I haven't really drawn in the shadows, and the reason for that is because you want the focus to be on the light side of the face. Naturally, we always focus on that side whenever you look at any object in real life. So you want to keep the information in the shadows to a minimum. In this case, because half his face is in shadow, I am going to draw a few accents in there. So I'm going to draw a bit of an outline for the eye, the side of his nose, the side of his mouth, just so we know where those things are located. But I'm going to try and keep it all to a bare minimum. When you place things in the shadows and you can't really see where they are, just try and remember that if the eye is a certain distance from the center of the nose on one side, it will be exactly the same on the other side, especially if we've got a front view like we have in the model right now. And of course, this is the same for the side of the nose and the side of the mouth. Generally, there's a symmetry to a face. Of course, people have small changes, but we can always put those changes on later. First, let's get the structure of the face in, and then we can start fiddling with it. Just a little thing to show you. When I put a stark line in the shadow shape, do you see how that catches the eye? It actually doesn't look that good. So don't worry if that happens, just erase it, just go in with the putty rubber or your hard eraser and just get rid of it. Remember, it's always better to just try something and then see if it works rather than not trying at all. If you rubber something out in the shadows, you can just go over the white mark that it leaves with your pencil. If it's nice and sharp, it should be quite precise and it will be able to fill those bits in. You can also go over that bit with your brush just to blend everything together a little bit, or your tissue or stump or fingers, whatever you're using at the time. As you can see, just by drawing with shapes without thinking too much about the actual objects, and we don't even have to put in eyelashes or any details like that, already you start to see a face. Okay, so it looks like we've got 5 minutes left. I'll just let you get on with the drawing for the last 5 minutes, and I'll see you for the last pose, the 30-minute one. Okay, so here we are at the last minute pose for today. I hope you've enjoyed yourself up until now. For this final one, I'm actually not going to speak as much as I did with the 20-minute and the tutorial, because I just want you to be able to just get on with the drawing a little bit. One little side note, I had some problems with my camera, so I have a little bit of an advantage on you guys where I've already got the box in. Promise it was not more than a minute, sorry about that. So just to start, just make the box like we practiced last week and in the 20-minute pose as well. Okay, so I've started shading quite quickly. For just a little side note for the box, I used the rule of thirds that I explained in the last video as well. And I measured the width versus the height, which was roughly the same. When I got the top lip in, I just looked if it was halfway or 1/3 down. In this case, it was 1/3 down from the bottom of his nose to his chin, so that's where I've placed it. Don't worry if your measurements aren't super precise with these quick poses. We're just trying to get, again, like I said in the other video, we're just trying to get a face in. And don't worry too much if it's his face right now. It's just important to just practice constructing a face. So I like to start shading fairly quickly, just getting my big blocks of shade in, just to get an idea of where the eyes are, where the side of the nose is, and already you can see that you start feeling an idea of space. Now I've got those big shapes in, I'm gonna start by breaking down those bigger shapes into small space. So again, just try thinking about big triangles, big squares, that sort of thing, and I work my way down. So I start with the eyes, start sort of breaking a few shapes down over there, and then I move to the nose, that sort of thing. I try not to spend too long on one bit because you can get a bit attached to your drawing. So what I try and do is always spend 30 seconds on one area and then move on, and then 30 seconds on the next area, and that way everything gets the same amount of attention and nothing goes ahead. And for instance, you'll have a beautiful eye but no mouth. I hope everybody's got a sharp pencil. If not, well, maybe watch my tutorial on materials again. If stuff feels a little bit overwhelming at the moment, or you're having trouble drawing and watching me draw and listening to me explain things at the same time, don't worry. This video will be up offline after this, so you can always rewatch things and draw along in your own time. So this time what we did was we did a 10-minute video, me doing a tutorial, and a 20 to 30-minute pose, me just drawing along. How did you guys feel about that change? Do you like it? Also, if you've got any requests for any other tutorial videos, just let us know in the comments and we can see what we can do. And as the people who saw last video as well know by now, I really like using the brush, but don't worry if you're not into that or you don't have a brush, it's completely optional. Okay, so now I've got all the big shapes in. and I've broken it down a little bit. What I'm trying to do is now go from a generic face to his face. So I'm moving the nose a little bit and sort of getting that bulge in the bottom of his nose in. And we're going to start breaking his eyes down a little bit, and I'm going to start adding hair. I usually don't really bother with the hair. I mainly try and get the skull in first, quite constructively, and then when I've got that in, then I start sort of doing the bits like the hair and his specific features. As you can see now, I've got the big skull in. I'm just adding his beard on top of it and his hair on his actual skull, and it's so much easier to put that in later when you've already got a nice constructed skull than getting confused by the hair and not knowing where the skull is. It gives for a much more realistic face. So I'm going to start breaking down the eye a little bit more, and what I try to do is, if a transition from light to shadow is a little bit harsher, I try to use the point of my pencil, and when it's a little bit more unclear where it starts, I try to use the side of my pencil, and that gives a little bit of difference in edge, and that makes the drawing look a bit more realistic. We'll get more into this later when we start breaking it down, the drawing down a bit more. Now I'm breaking stuff further, down further. What I'm doing is I'm now not using the brush anymore, and I'm actually using the stump. It's something I spoke about in my material videos. The stump is just a little bit more precise, and it can, which is something you sort of need at this point in the drawing, whereas the brush would just have sort of blended everything, which is nice at the start, but at this point I think we need something a little bit more specific, which is why I'm using the stump right now. So now we're sort of finishing this drawing a little bit more precisely. I want to talk a little bit about edges. Edges are basically the transition between light and dark. So the two types of edges, or really the two extremes of edges, are the soft edge and the hard edge. Hard edges really happen only when you've got a cast shadow. So for instance, in this case, the shadow on the left of his nose is being cast by his nose. So that's a cast shadow, and they always start off really sharp. And the second way a sharp edge might appear is when you've got overlap. So on the side, the far end of his nose, the far side, it's his nose is overlapping the skin of his cheek. So that's where you also get a really, really sharp edge. And lastly, a sharp edge can also appear when something turns away really, really sharply. So 90-degree angles, which is not often in the face. So in my drawing at the moment, the sharp edges are the cast shadows of the top lip, the nose, and his eye. So those are my sharp edges. And the second edge family is the soft edges, and they are a little bit easier than the hard edges in terms of why they appear. They just generally appear when something turns away softly. So think of an egg rather than a box. There are no hard corners on an egg, so everything turns away softly. And that's also how I tend to think of as a head, a big egg. So a lot of these edges will be soft. And what makes a drawing look interesting or alive is having all these soft edges and sharp edges next to each other. If you have everything sort of soft, the drawing may look a bit washed out or a bit cloudy. But if you've got everything harsh, it might not look entirely realistic. It might look a bit like a cartoon or a comic book character. Again, as you can see on this drawing, I don't put too much effort into the shadows other than where the light is. So in this case, we are going to want the viewer to look at the feature. So that's where I put most of my effort, and I don't really put a lot of effort into the side of the face that's in shadow, because actually that's not really where we want the viewer to look. So that's also where I'm not going to really draw that much. Okay, so it looks like we've got about 10 minutes left. I might just let you get on with the drawing. I'm gonna stop speaking for now. Do let me know if you got any questions in the comments. I'm here to answer them, so happy to chat. And I hope you have fun with the rest of the drawing. All right, so I think we're pretty much at the end of our portrait session this week. I hope you enjoyed yourselves, and I will see you next week, hopefully.
Thank you for taking part. Don't forget to post your work on Instagram and tag it with hashtag #RawAmberLive. I'd like to thank Lizette Dingemans for doing the drawing demonstration, and you can download photographs of the model from the link I'm about to show you on the screen. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Instagram. We're Raw Amber Studios. I'm going to run this every Sunday as long as the current situation continues, so I'll see you next week.